Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring the awe-inspiring advancements and, honestly, the enduring mysteries of the ancient Indus Valley Civilization. We're talking about a society that thrived over 4,000 years ago, but in so many ways feels incredibly modern. Just imagine a world of sprawling, interconnected cities, a booming global economy, and absolute brilliance in engineering, all happening while much of the rest of the world was still living in pretty primitive conditions.
But here's the thing. How do you uncover the secrets of an absolute superpower when you can't even read their words? It's the ultimate paradox with these guys. They left behind absolutely zero readable records. We've got no grand epic poems, no boastful lists of conquering kings, no detailed historical chronicles, nothing. So literally everything we know about them has had to be painstakingly pieced together from the silent evidence left in the dirt. Their bricks, their drains, their trade weights, and their everyday artifacts.
To crack this historical mystery, we're going to follow a quick roadmap. We'll start with the silent ancient superpower, move to their masters of urban engineering, then the first global merchants, the unsolved script enigma, and finally, the fall of the Indus.
Section 1. The silent, ancient superpower. Let's just start by wrapping our heads around the sheer geographical footprint of this empire because it absolutely dwarfed its famous contemporaries.
To really put this scale into perspective, archaeologists have discovered over 1,500 distinct Indus Valley sites. And these aren't just crammed into one tiny little valley, right? They span across modern-day India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. We're talking about a highly integrated cultural and economic zone covering over 1 million square kilometers, stretching all the way from the Himalayas down to the Arabian Sea. It is massive. And this didn't just pop up overnight. It developed over millennia, kicking off around 3300 BCE with the early Harappan phase, before hitting its absolute prime, what we called the mature urban phase around 2600 BCE. This mature phase lasted for hundreds of years. It was this incredible era of stability, wealth, and tech advancements before eventually slipping into a late decline around 1900 BCE.
Section 2. Masters of Urban Engineering. When archaeologists first started digging these cities up, they were completely blown away by what they found. Get this, 4,500 years ago, these cities had shockingly modern amenities. Entire cities were laid out in precise grid patterns using perfectly standardized baked bricks. People were living in multi-story residential homes, equipped with advanced rainwater harvesting and their own private wells. And the craziest part? They actually had flush-type toilets that emptied out into a highly sophisticated, covered communal drainage system running right underneath the city's streets.
When you stack this up against their contemporaries in Egypt and Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley's commitment to public health and sewage disposal was completely unique in the ancient world. While other places were pouring all their sweat into building giant pyramids or massive ziggurats for god kings, the Indus Valley was pouring its resources into public infrastructure and sanitation for everyday, regular citizens.
You can literally see their cultural obsession with water in their biggest structures. It is so fascinating to look at a site like Dhalavira, which managed its water supply using these massive stone reservoirs to get through the dry seasons. Then you have Mohenjo-Daro, boasting over 700 wells and the legendary Great Bath. Now, this wasn't just some community swimming pool. Scholars are pretty confident it was a center for communal, waterborne purification ceremonies.
Section 3. The first global merchants. Let's look at how all this urban planning fueled an absolute economic powerhouse. They were basically the world's first global supply chain managers.
A massive driver behind this booming economy was a fascinating figure known in later texts as the Sartavaha. Think of this guy not just as a trail guide, but as a proto-corporate logistics manager. They managed joint stock investments, negotiated safe passage with local tribes, managed risk, and made sure these giant caravans loaded with incredibly valuable goods actually survived crossing treacherous deserts and mountains.
So, the Indus Valley was essentially the manufacturing hub of the ancient world. They were exporting high-value, luxury manufactured goods. Think exquisitely crafted carnelian beads, ivory, and literally some of the world's very first cotton textiles. And in return, they imported massive amounts of raw materials, raw copper, tin, gold, just to feed their relentless industrial workshops.
And they definitely were not staying local. Their Afro-Eurasian trade network was unprecedented. They used the famous northern Uttarapatha land route to push into Central Asia, navigated the Vapnupatha desert tracks out west, and even set up complex maritime corridors sailing straight across the Arabian Sea to trade directly with Mesopotamia and Egypt.
A true marvel of this sprawling network is the Lothal dockyard down in Gujarat. Widely considered the world's earliest artificial tidal dock, it used highly sophisticated hydrological engineering, lock gates, spillways, to manage those really aggressive tidal flows. It was big enough to park dozens of cargo ships all at once, right next to a massive mud brick warehouse for super efficient loading and unloading.
But how do you maintain trust across all those thousands of miles? You need a universal standard, and their magic number was exactly 13.6 grams. They used a super strict standardized binary weight system based on this precise unit. So whether you were buying something in a bustling Indus market or way out at a trading post in Central Asia, an Indus weight of 13.6 grams was always identical. It basically guaranteed precise, corruption-free international accounting.
Section 4. The Unsolved Script Enigma.
Okay, let's dive into the most tantalizing part of this whole story. Why, after decades of intense study by the smartest people on Earth, can we still not read a single word they wrote?
Trying to crack a lost script is a monumental headache. Cryptographers first have to confirm it's actually a writing system, isolate the signs, assign them phonetic values, and then try to map those to a known language. But with the Indus script, the hurdles are massive. The inscriptions are incredibly short. We're talking an average of just 5 characters per seal. And worse, we have absolutely zero bilingual texts. No Rosetta Stone to serve as our cheat sheet.
But linguist Peggy Mohan brings up a really fascinating point. As she says, most prehistoric societies weren't writing down the kind of stuff we write today. Commercial info is probably the very first thing anyone bothered to record. Some modern scholars actually argue that rather than poetry or history, these symbols aren't a spoken language at all. They might just be a non-linguistic corporate hallmarking system, like logos or barcodes used by merchant families to seal goods and guarantee quality.
Because the hard evidence is so incredibly thin, academics neutrally debate a few distinct possibilities. You've got top scholars like Asko Parpala, who argue it's an ancestor of Dravidian languages, like Old Tamil. Then others, like S.R. Rao, propose roots in Sanskrit in the Vedic civilization. And then, as we just mentioned, researchers like Steve Farmer and Peggy Mohan suggest it's just a non-linguistic system of commercial hallmarks. Without that bilingual text, it's pretty much anyone's guess.
Section 5. The Fall of the Indus. Let's look at the endgame. How does a civilization this vast, this advanced, and apparently this peaceful just collapse around 1900 BCE?
Well, for the longest time, the big theory was this violent Aryan invasion that swept in and wiped the cities out. But modern science actually tells a very different story. Recent, highly advanced DNA analysis from a skeleton at the Rakhigarhi site revealed distinct ancestry linking them to ancient Iranian agriculturalists and indigenous Andaman-related populations. Crucially, they found absolutely zero Aryan R1A gene markers from the steppe. So that genetic evidence basically busted the old invasion myth, proving the Indus people were an indigenous, genetically distinct population. If it wasn't war, what was it?
The real culprit seems to be severe ecological disaster. The civilization was getting battered by massive, repeated flooding. Over time, severe climate change caused shifting monsoon patterns, which eventually led to the drying up and completely changing course of the very river systems they relied on, like the ancient Sarasvati River. Without a stable environment to grow food and run their trade economy, these massive urban centers just couldn't survive anymore, and the population slowly dispersed.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. How does the story of a highly advanced, peaceful civilization brought down by climate change and shifting rivers serve as a warning for us today? The Indus Valley was this incredible, globally connected superpower, but their ancient struggles with unpredictable weather and water scarcity, well, it sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? It directly mirrors the challenges our own globally connected world is facing right now. What can we learn from their silence? Thank you so much for joining me, and keep asking questions.